couple of questions that people have wanted me to ask you, and I'll ask them one after listening to your presentation. You're incredibly positive about the future. One lady said,
"Is that a question?"
No, one lady said, "What drug is he taking?" But I mean, are you that positive? I mean, everything you say points in an upward trajectory that things will continue to get better.
Well, the reality is things are getting better, but people don't realize that. And there was a poll taken recently of 24,000 people in 26 countries, and they were asked, is poverty worldwide getting better or worse?
Right.
90% said incorrectly that it's getting worse. Only 1% said correctly that it's come down by half in the last 20 years. But if you look at all these statistics, poverty, these trend lines look like the ones I've shown you. They're just getting better. This is not just abstract information technology, instructions per second. This is actual statistics on poverty and education, on health, on longevity. They're all moving in the right direction. I point out this is the most peaceful time in human history. And say, what are you kidding? Don't you pay attention to the news? There was just this incident last week and week before that. Well, our information about everything that's wrong with the world, including violence, is getting exponentially better. And there's also a human fascination with bad news. Actually, that's an evolutionary adaptation. 10,000 years ago, you needed to be very acutely aware of bad news. Some rustling in the leaves that might indicate a predator, you better be aware of that. The fact that your crops maybe were, 1% better than last year, that wasn't so important.
But why do we need to be aware of that now? For example, you're right. I mean, people, when you look at the ratings for TV news, people will watch
Well, I think
bad
we
news.
have this evolutionary adaptation from 50,000 years ago. Our brains have not changed very much since that time. And we have a human compassion for small groups of people. So we hear about one family halfway around the world, and there's some terrible thing that happens, and our heart goes out to them. It's actually a good thing, even though it's painful, because we then try to do something about it. But the reality is all these various parameters are getting better, but that is not the perception. People's algorithm for whether things are getting better or worse is how often do I hear about something good versus something bad. And it's actually not a very good way to measure things. If we look at the current issues, there's still a lot of poverty, although it's much better than it was. There's still a lot of disease, although we're making very rapid progress. So we need to continue in these ways. But if you look at these, I think, very predictable trajectories, I showed you how predictable they are. And I made these predictions starting 35 years ago. So I didn't start 2 weeks ago. And so these progressions are very predictable. We're going to continue with 3D printing. We're going to be able to print the physical things we need at very low cost, including modules to snap together a building. That's already been done experimentally in Asia. Vertical agriculture, controlled by AI, will produce high-quality food without chemicals at very low cost. So all of these technologies which will meet the material needs of humans are coming into place.
We were told yesterday that Moore's law is no longer valid.
Well, I talked about that. Moore's law was not the first, but the fifth paradigm to bring exponential growth to computing, and it's not the last. And people have been saying for 30 years, Moore's law is going to come to an end. Well, it's not ended. It's slowing down now, but we've already gone into the sixth paradigm. So the shrinking of transistors on a flat integrated circuit, that progression has slowed down. The price performance of computing, the cost of an instruction per second has not slowed down. That's continuing to double every year. So we're using other methods aside from Moore's law. We're going to the sixth paradigm. And it's a fundamental law of innovation that we try to progress by multiples rather than additively.
Do you think our humanity is evolving along with our technology? our ability to show empathy, for example, is that evolving at the same speed as our ability to acquire knowledge?
Well, I would say yes. Again, it may not appear that way since we see amplified examples where people are not compassionate. But the number of democracies in the world, you could count on the fingers of one hand a century ago. Mm-hmm. 2 centuries ago, you could count the number of democracies in the world on the fingers of one finger. Now, the whole world is not a democracy, but there are actually quite a few dozens of countries that are good democracies, and it has become a consensus as the right way to organize humanity. Despite appearances, there is actually a worldwide consensus on how we should treat each other. And the worldwide communication we have, I think, amplifies our ability to be empathetic to other types of people. 100 years ago, people only kind of met the people in their village, and they may never have met other kinds of people. So that now, with travel and certainly with the ubiquitousness of communication, we are becoming a global village.
So do you think we're becoming better human beings?
Yes, I think so. We're more democratic, we're more compassionate, and we are the practical issues of reducing poverty and increasing education. 100, 150 years ago, very few people were literate and educated. Now that's kind of a standard. Not everybody, but for the most part, the kids are being educated today.
What do you worry about?
Well, I mean, I have written about the double-edged sword of technology for 30 years. In the Age of Spiritual Machines, I wrote about how technology has always been a double-edged sword. Fire kept us warm, cooked our food, but also burned down our houses. Every technology has been used for creative and destructive purposes. These 3 overlapping revolutions, biotechnology, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, also have profound benefit and peril. I think we can take some comfort, at least optimism, not absolute security, from how well we've done with the revolution that's now underway, which is biotechnology. Mm-hmm. 40 years ago, there was a conference in California, the Asilomar Conference, on biotechnology ethics, because some visionaries said, wow, this technology is going to overcome disease, but it could also be used by a bioterrorist to create a new virus that's deadly and communicable and create a new super weapon. Actually, none of that was feasible 40 years ago. So these were visionaries. But they had a conference on ethical guidelines to keep the technology safe. And there have been periodic conferences to update that. So now, as I mentioned, we're now seeing benefit. And that's going to be a flood over the next decade. And so far, the number of people who have been hurt by biotechnology is 0. That doesn't mean we can cross it off our list and say, okay, we took care of that one because the technology keeps getting more sophisticated. But it should give us some optimism that this is a good paradigm. I just participated in an Asilomar conference on AI ethics, artificial intelligence, patterned on the Asilomar Conference of Biotech. So, I mean, I think this is, there is great promise, but also peril. Just like any other technology, these can be used for good or destructive purposes. I'm optimistic we can keep them safe, but I think that's actually the highest priority issue for humanity.
There was a lot of talk today about the future of artificial intelligence and what that means. Do you see a time when our machines will become conscious and when they will think the way we do?
Well, I am a believer that consciousness is not dependent on the physical substrate that the intelligent process runs on. So, I mean, there are philosophers like John Searle at the University of Berkeley, California, Berkeley, who think that a mind has to be biological. And if it's not squirting biological neurotransmitters, it can't be conscious. So that's his philosophical viewpoint. Consciousness is actually not a scientific concept. There's no scientific falsifiable experiment you can run that absolutely proves that this entity is conscious and this one's not. There's no machine you can devise. You slide something in and a green light goes on. Okay, this one's conscious, this one isn't. That doesn't have some philosophical assumptions built into it. So you need a philosophical leap of faith. And there's some scientists, and at times my mentor Marvin Minsky said this, well, it's not scientific, so it's just an illusion. Let's not waste time on it. That's not my view because our whole moral system is based on consciousness. Mm-hmm. And so my philosophical leap of faith is if it can act in the way that we associate with conscious beings, and we assume that humans are conscious, at least most humans seem
most
to
of
be
them
conscious.
are.
not all of them, but and if an entity can really appear convincingly like that, then I would accept it as being conscious. Mm-hmm. So that's the essence of the Turing test, that if you could have an AI that's actually running on a computer that can convince you that it's conscious in a dialogue, and this makes the assumption that human language is requires all of human intelligence, and I go along with that. Then I would say that that entity is conscious. And no computer has done that. I predicted that that'll happen by 2029. And I would say that if an entity is really convincing with all the subtle cues that we associate with human intelligence, then I would accept it as conscious. And if we don't accept it, they'll get mad at us and they'll be very smart, so we won't want that to happen.
Do you think about what will happen to you once you've died? Do you think that there is something that will go on or continue that is a part of you after your mortal self is no more?
Well, I mean, I'm not planning.
Well, I'm not saying you're planning to die, but I mean, do you? But
so, plan A is to get to what I call longevity escape velocity, where we're advancing our longevity faster than time going by, and I think that's only 10 to 15 years away. So, following what I call Bridge 1 to get finally to Bridge 2, which will bring longevity escape velocity. And Plan B is really the same as Plan A. Plan C is the same as Plan B. I haven't thought much about these plans failing.
Well, I'm not trying to accelerate your demise, but do you think we're going to get to a place where we're going to live forever?
Well, I can never come to you and say, I've done it, I've lived forever, because it's never forever.
Right.
I do think we'll be able to indefinitely extend our longevity. Nothing is certain. You can still be hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow. We're working on that too with self-driving vehicles. So I'm optimistic, but we have existential dangers like nuclear weapons, and that's not an information technology, unfortunately. So nothing is certain, but I'm optimistic that we can get to a point where we can indefinitely extend our longevity and address the things that cut our lives short.
A couple of yes or no questions that I collected today. Do you believe we will find a cure for cancer in our lifetime?
Yes.
Do you think that there are extraterrestrial beings?
No, and that's a long explanation. The common SETI assumption is that, there's millions and billions of stars in each galaxy and billions of galaxies, and so there must be out there somewhere. And then the assumption is that millions of years could go by and they're still kind of like us, communicating with radio and television, and it does not take the law of accelerating returns into account. Where just in a few hundred years we've gone from where the fastest way to send a message was on a pony to where we have 4G networks, and a few more decades we'll be having much more profound ways of communicating and transcending our biology and so on. If there were civilizations ahead of us, they wouldn't be ahead of us by 10 years or 100 years. They'd be ahead of us by millions of years, because cosmological time is over billions of years.
Right.
And they'd be doing galaxy-wide engineering, and we would notice them. And we don't notice them. That's the Fermi paradox. So I have a whole discussion of this in Singularities in the Air. We can't be absolutely sure. There might be a civilization that's outside our light sphere, and the light hasn't gotten to us yet. But I make the argument that it's unlikely, and make the case that we are, in fact, first, at least in our light sphere.
Will religion survive our evolution?
Will
religion?
Well, thank you. Religion deals with valid issues, like why are we here, and what are we supposed to do, and why are our lives so short, and it dealt with death, which I think is a great tragedy, and the best we could do would be to rationalize that, that tragic thing, that's really a good thing. It's a liberation. That makes sense if you have no alternative. I mean, I think now you can make a rational case that we can indefinitely forestall death, and I make the case it's a tragedy. People say, it's really a good thing, and if the fact that our lives are short gives meaning to time, I think it actually robs our lives of meaning. What gives our lives meaning is what we can do with it, being creative, having relationships. But the questions that religion asks are valid. The answers we came up with were devised in pre-scientific times, so I think we should continue to evolve our responses.
Will marriage exist in 100 years?
Well, yes, but we're already evolving ideas of relationships. If you look at the idea of fidelity, that was a pretty simple concept 100 years ago, so now, what constitutes infidelity is just one example of what marriage implies. We'll have the ability to have relationships in virtual reality. They'll become indistinguishable from real reality. And so we're going to have to, just like in religion, we're going to have to redefine what that means. Certainly marriage came up in an era where generally the relationship was only expected to last some modest number of decades.
Right. I mean, can you foresee a time when people are married for 100 years and are happily married for 100 years?
I believe in commitments and committing to a positive concept and to a person and dealing with the challenges that come up.
Final question for you. You have been asked many questions and will be asked many questions. Is there one question that you wish people would pose that has never been posed to you?
I've been asked a lot of questions. Well, I can't remember actually being asked this in quite these words, and it was an original question that religion has attempted to answer, but why are we here? So it's very exciting that we have these technologies and new frontiers, and we can do things we couldn't do before, and we can overcome various limitations, but why does the universe exist? Why do we exist? Why am I who I am? I mean, I wake up every morning and I'm this guy. I have a particular name and identity, and
right.
Why wasn't I Taylor Swift? Or
really?
And my therapist said, "Oh, well, tell me more about that." But why are we who we are? We didn't choose that. We can shape who we are, but anyway, I think it's a hard question to even articulate.
Have you ever wanted to be Taylor Swift?
Well, I actually, in 2001 at TED, the conference,
yeah.
I turned myself into a young female rock singer using virtual reality technology of that era. I had magnetic sensors, and as I moved, the computer picked up my movement and created a female, a band came on stage, and I sang White Rabbit. My daughter, who was then 13, was turned into a male backup dancer. And I have a novel coming out which kind of embodies my vision of who I'd like to be. It's called Danielle, Chronicles of a Superheroine. It follows a young girl.
That's great.
So not Taylor Swift, but some other women. So.
Wow. Well, Mr. Kurzweil, thank you very much. Fascinating. I think people will be able to ask you questions too when they come up for your book signing. But thank you very much. It was really fascinating to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you.